Hi there, it's Kelly here from Divine Alchemy Healing, and today I thought I'd share with you a little bit of my story about how I realised I had the exorcist archetype within me and became an entity clearer. So I had a few experiences as a child and a young adult sort of growing up where I knew there was something not right with the energy, but I really had no idea what it was until I moved into my own flat when I was about probably 19, and some very strange things started happening in that flat. I knew there was something abnormal about it, but I didn't really know anything about that. I spoke to a friend at work who happened to have a mum who was a clairvoyant, and she asked her if she could just have a look at the flat. And it turned out we had a sailor there that was attached to the old beams that we had in this flat. It turned out it had some beams from some of Henry VIII's warships, for want of a better description. And the lady said, "Don't worry, he'll go on leave soon, so he'll be gone." And oddly, that happened. Everything became peaceful. The things we were experiencing at that time were cupboards rattling and opening on their own. The stereo would turn on and off. The little TV we had would just switch itself on. There was a very strange energy in the place actually, and sometimes when I was getting ready in the morning I sort of had this wardrobe that had a sort of mirror on one side, and so I just check myself before I went off to work, and the wardrobe would just tip on top of me, which was quite disturbing. And yeah, that was that experience. Occasionally I'd come home from work and I had a flatmate who was living with me at the time who worked in the local pub, and she'd still be working, so I'd stay in the house, but I'd only ever managed to stay in there for about 10 minutes before I felt completely freaked out. And so I'd just gather my bag and all my bits and run down to this local pub and sit there waiting for her to finish her shift, and then when we came back together it would just be easier to be there when there was someone else there. But my big event really that changed my life was when I got a job working on a private estate looking after some horses, and I met and fell in love with very quickly a man who was also working there, and we ended up moving in together into the cottage that he already lived in. And that's when things really did take a turn for the worst in our experience at the time. So I think I'd been there for about 3 weeks at the time, and my partner started noticing sort of damage on items. There was a lamp, for example, that had a sort of cork base, and it looked like someone had picked loads of it away. And of course, because I'd only just moved in, he naturally presumed it was me, and I'd like to say at this point he was a complete atheist at this time as well. So we'd have a bit of an argument about it, because I said, "Why on earth would you think I would be sitting here picking at a cork lamp base?" But he couldn't come up with any other option other than to believe it was me. And from there on in, things got steadily worse and worse. All sorts of things. Wherever we looked, there was damage. But at that point, nothing of mine was being damaged. It was all his stuff. He had a wonderful, very large vinyl collection and an African mask collection that was all kept in a room that was sort of locked when he wasn't at home. But things started happening in there. Some of the masks had really strange holes appearing. There was weeping. Sort of weird fluid coming out of these holes, and then some of his precious and beloved vinyl, the album covers, were sort of melting and melding, and nothing could really explain it, but he at that point still sort of thought it must be me, or it must be someone coming into the cottage when we're both at work. I was full-time with the horses, and he was pretty much full-time outside with the garden, and doing these things, because that was really the only logical explanation at that time. Things continued to go very strange. The cat and the dog refused to come in the house a lot of the time, and when the dog was in, it was a lovely little cocker spaniel, he or she, I should say, started acting very strangely, and barking and growling and looking sort of straight behind us a lot of the time. We had some friends who we spoke to who thought, this sounds all a bit odd, and advised us to try and contact someone clairvoyant or something like that. There was a few points within that period as well where we almost split up over it, because my partner just couldn't get his head round what was happening, and it did seem at the time to tie in with me moving in. Obviously I knew that wasn't the case, but eventually we got to the point, and it was one specific day actually, where he was outside and now this is going to sound a little bit crazy, but this is how bad it had got. We'd go to our local supermarket and pick up some shopping, and then when we came back, he would like open a jar of unopened coffee and empty it all out on newspaper to check that it was okay, and in it would be these really weird black stones. Now they weren't coffee stuck together, they were actual stones, and then everywhere he looked these black stones started appearing. I sort of joined in with this looking at this point, and everywhere I looked the black stones would appear as well, and it was really like almost, well, what we found out actually was that entities can read your mind, so whatever you think might happen, they will use that. So, for instance, if I thought I'd better check up on the top of that window shelf in the bathroom to make sure there's nothing up there, of course there would be these very strange, lumpy, but also sparkly black stones just all dotted along. So eventually we rang a clairvoyant, and she was at first said to us, "Oh, that's okay, don't worry, I'll get some people together and we will come over to the house and we'll do a clear. Give me a couple of days and, we'll sort this out for you." So that, sort of made us feel a sense of relief. But the energy in the house dropped to this awful sort of almost like freezing cold energy that, just put shivers up our spine. At one point, our trusty Land Rover broke down, the phone stopped working, and it felt like we were really isolated because we were out on this private estate that was pretty rural. So anyway, a few days go by, we haven't heard anything back from this clairvoyant lady, so I thought I'll give her a call. So I rang her back, and she sort of reacted like this. She went, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't know where you were. I think you should get a priest and put the phone down on me," which of course, again, put us into quite a high fear state. So after that, I looked again. It was funny because you could look in the local paper at this point and find sort of adverts for things. So I looked again and I saw an advert for the local spiritualist church, and I rang them, and they were much more sort of forthcoming. They were quite abrupt actually. They were sort of, "Well, why do you think you've got a problem?" And I basically just said, we don't know anything about this, but what we do know is it's not normal. I don't think a human could be doing some of these things, and we're just really worried. Our cat and dog stopped really wanting to be in the house, especially the cat. And I just gave them a few experiences, like when I go upstairs to go to sleep, I feel like I'm being throttled, and there's a lot of damage in the house. So they agreed to come out, and again, they said, "We'll put protection around the house for you, and two things will either happen. Either it'll go very quiet and you'll start to think you've made it all up, or they'll kick off. Well, for most of the time, it did actually go quiet. I think we had to wait about a week or so for them to be able to come out. But there were, again, a few times where, yeah, it got quite almost to the point, yeah, Derek was going to drop me home and leave me there, therefore ending our relationship. But one thing that did happen that was quite sort of amusing to us was that Derek had realised that if you said, well, I bet they won't be able to do this, it was almost like they would do it immediately. And one thing that he had quite a bit of fun with was he used to wear these sort of canvas lace-up boots, a bit like high tops. And he said he'd woken up a couple of days to find the laces in really intricate patterns. So he started saying, yes, but yeah, you know, they might have done that once, but they won't be able to do it again. And you'd almost, it would happen before you could even, you know, you weren't seeing it happening. It was just there when you next blinked and opened your eyes. And another thing that happened that was, for me, actually, was one of the sort of real things that, yeah, just chilled me to the bone, apart from the feeling like I was being throttled on the bed. We had these beautiful green tiles around a fireplace, an open fireplace, and a really prominent devil-like face appeared in one of the tiles. And it was so prominent that people would actually come in and sort of gasp, because that's how prominent it was. Anyway, we got the Spiritualist Church out. They came out and spent 4 hours clearing the house. Again, they were very sort of, when they got there, they were like, you know, tell us why you think there's anything wrong. Very serious. And they then walked around the house and they came back and said, yeah, you've got around 100 entities here. You've got about 25 to 30 of them that are active, that are working in a hierarchy. And the rest are just watching and enjoying the show. So they then went into Trance Channel and basically took a few hours to clear the whole house. And they said, our advice to you now is to know that the house has been cleared and not look for any more paranormal activity. Just recognise this has been done and we'll be in touch. They did also give us some information, because we had a few questions, just a few questions after experiencing such a strange thing. And they said part of the reason that the activity had increased was that when my partner and I got together, they knew we were going to go on a path together, a spiritual path. And one of my roles was, well, they didn't actually tell me this at the time, but later on they told me that one of my roles would be to do entity clearing. I think if they'd have told me at the time, I would have probably run off into the sunset screaming no. So anyway, so they cleared the house and everything was so different. It felt like the air had been hoovered. We sort of came back into harmony ourselves, and then we were due to leave that place. And we, when we moved into our next house, we had a similar, not anywhere near as much, but we had a couple, actually I've skipped ahead, we had another couple of experiences with entity interference. And it was then that the Spiritualist Church people said, you know, the reason is you two are going to be a powerful force together and it's going to change your life forever. Well, it already had, to be honest, and the only reason it had was because we'd had this entity attack, essentially. And so, you know, I often laugh to myself thinking that entities are often quite short-sighted in the way they react to things, because yeah, if they hadn't have kicked off, we probably wouldn't have noticed they were there. Apparently they'd been there for quite a long time, and we wouldn't have gone on the spiritual path. Maybe we would have found another way to it, but that was certainly a real kick up the bum, basically. And they said, the spiritualist church said to us, we need you to stay away from all paranormal stuff. Don't do tarot or anything that you have to reach out to psychically. But they also did invite us over to their house, where they got me to do a tarot reading in a protected space. I'd never even touched a tarot set at that point, and I had no idea what any of the cards meant. They just instructed me to, shuffle the cards, pull some cards for one of the ladies called Peggy, and do a reading for her. And they said, all you need to do is just ask your guides what this card means for Peggy each time you draw one. So we drew them. I did what I felt was sort of a made up reading, but it turned out it was actually very accurate. We went on, and we went on to a completely opposite path of high level guides and divine spirit. We'd gone up to Watkins bookshop in London, and a book had literally almost fallen off the shelf and clogged Derek as it came out, and it turned out to be a book called The Mahatma I Am Presence. I think I picked up a few books as well at the same time on spiritual guides, and we started reading and sort of realising there was so much more to life than we'd ever really been aware of. At the same time, and this was a mystery to us for many years, someone put a cassette tape, that's how long ago it was, they put a cassette tape through our door, and on it was a channeling on one side from a guide called Ashtar, and on the other side from a guide called Sananda. And we listened to these channelings. They were by a man called Eric Klein, and it had a really profound effect on us. I just started sort of meditating, and I started feeling the connection from both of those guides, and then Archangel Michael as well. Again, it was a very clear process to me at the time that I was connecting to these higher level beings, because I was feeling a sense of unconditional love and joy that I'd never experienced on earth, even though when I was around horses I felt very, very connected, and I really, I loved them so much. It made me so happy, but this was something else. And from there, I'm going to have to skip forward a few years. We trained in Reiki. We started giving Reiki to lots and lots of people. I started running a meditation group, which now when I think about it, I was really a baby meditator myself, but we gathered people together and we held these meditations, and it all just sort of flowed quite naturally. And then Derek and I eventually parted ways, and I do believe that was a spiritual thing. We'd grown as much as we could together, and we both had slightly different paths to take. And my path was to train in other therapies. I trained as a hypnotherapist, and at the time, my naivety, I sort of thought, yes, this is something that I'll be doing. Spirit probably won't be involved in this very much because it's a process. And little did I know they were going to be sort of really dictating the sessions. I'd also, through ill health, I'd started to lose my vision, which lasted for about 4 years at that time. So I trained in the hypnotherapy. I had a very kind man who was my tutor, and who, really helped me, because, I couldn't see much. I could still see to read with a magnifying glass. So that's how I did all the theory. But by the time I was ready and had passed my exams, I had very little sight. And I started advertising in eye hospitals because that's where I was going. So I got a lot of doctors and people in, and all of them were coming in with attached entities. Now, something I've always said to my guides, because I didn't really want to be doing that work, and in fact for the first probably year I'd phone up the spiritual church and say, I've had this client and they've got this, and could you help? And they'd come out and do some work, and one day they turned to me and said, Kelly, you do know this is your life path. You are going to have to get over your fear and do this yourself, and your guides will never overface you. And yeah, at the time that was for me a terrifying thought, really, that I would be doing this. But little by little I sort of got my confidence with it. I then went on a training course in the New Forest, and ended up, because I'd had so much experience by then, I sort of ended up not running the course, but like I gave them so many examples of things that can happen and how they work together, and you know, the different types of entities that you might come across, that the lady ended up thanking me for coming and for sharing all my experiences. And then I still, at that time, you know, I used to find it quite not terrifying, but I didn't feel very relaxed about it. And I was also seeing entities at the time as well. I'd often wake up in the night and there would be entities hovering around, pulling funny faces at me. But funny enough, I don't know where I picked it up from, but I remember I thought, I'm never going to communicate with you at night time. It's my time to sleep and rest, and I never did, and I still don't. I don't really get them at night anymore, but I wouldn't if I did. So went on. I was doing a very specific type of entity removal where I would get the entity to speak through the client to find out why they had come and what we could learn from it, and to take them through the tunnel. We're still with my guides, but I would guide it. And eventually, it was funny because it was almost as I started to lose my fear about it, my guide said, you don't need to do it this way anymore. We're going to do it for you. You can just make a statement, hold the energy. We don't need to have the communication going, and we'll just do all the clearing. Now, part of that was because I was also struggling with the start of kidney failure at the time, and they wanted to protect my kidneys because sometimes when you're working with hierarchies, not just you know, the odd entity that's having to be attached to your house or something like that, or you've picked up, but actual hierarchies, which, to be honest, they're not very common. Yeah, they'll attack you in your weakest place. So they actually put me under the radar for quite a while and did all the work themselves, and that's how we've continued to work. And now I don't really see them at all. I sense them still because I can feel the energy. I call it a funkiness in someone's energy field. But I also have a system set up with my guides that I don't really ever talk about it to my clients. There's nowhere on my website that talks about it. In fact, there is one page which I put up fairly recently, but for years I didn't have anything. And I just have some signs that I say to my guides. If the clients start telling me these certain things, then I'll take that as, okay, we need to look at doing an entity release or a clear of their home or something like that. So one of my biggest sort of people that have helped me was a client that came to me that lived in, well, she had a history of living in very haunted houses. They weren't picking them on purpose, but they just had something in their energy fields that needed to experience this. And goodness me, we could write a novel about the experiences we've had clearing that house and keeping it clear as well, because it had some work done on it in the past by a group who were using it for black magic. So I got an awful lot of experience with her, and I'll always hold her in, you know, great thanks for giving me that experience. But that's sort of the basis of my story of how I became an entity releaser. I still do the odd bit of entity releasing. Generally my clients now come in, they don't tend to have entities, but I do help anyone who requests it. And as you know, there's a a video up on YouTube for anyone who needs to run through either a clearing of their space or their energy field, so you can take yourself through it. So that's basically the story of how I became an entity releaser. It's not something I would have consciously chosen ever, because I've never watched horror films. I've always been a bit, that's the thing. As a child, I was most terrified of was something that wasn't human being in my room. And I used to have this funny little routine. I was terrified of the dark. I'd turn all the lights on, and when it was my time to go to bed, I'd run up the stairs, bash open my bedroom door to make sure there was nothing behind it, look under the bed, check the wardrobe, bash the curtains, and and occasionally, if my parents were out when I was slightly older, I would often sit in my bed with a can of hairspray and a knife, because I could hear things. Like if I was upstairs, I could hear things downstairs, and if I was downstairs, I could hear voices and footsteps upstairs. And so it turned out I was energy aware for a lot longer than I'd really realised. But anyway, I will leave it there because I could go on forever about this topic. If you do need any help, do my entity clearing video, or if you feel like you need more help than that, you're very welcome to put a message and get in touch with me. Alright, I'm wishing you a wonderful day filled with light, love and unconditional support, and hopefully I will see you again soon. Take care. Bye bye.